So if you haven't seen my video from yesterday where I talk about a little bit about ending capitalism and a bit about socialism, I wanted to bring your attention to, if that has piqued your interest at all, to the Party for Socialism and Liberation, and they've done a series of an analysis and reading of Capital by Karl Marx, and I wanted to bring your attention to that so you could check it out. You can find it on SoundCloud and Spotify. I think it's very helpful because Capital is actually multiple volumes and a lot of reading, and sometimes people don't have enough time for that. It's important that we understand it and understand the problems with capitalism and the problems associated with it. So please check that out. And today, I was just wandering through some of the Guardian stuff. Normally I don't really look at corporate media. I let other people do that and mention things that are pretty awful, which is often the case, because there's just too much propaganda to wade through. But anyway, today I saw something about mental health in Britain, and they've brought in this program. It was brought in about 3 years ago. It's called Serenity Integrated Mentoring, which is a really dystopian name, SIM, and it's been adopted by 23 NHS mental health trusts in England, and it was designed to enable police and A&E services to cope with patients who regularly phone 911 or arrive at hospitals having self-harmed, attempted suicide, or threatened to take their own life. When tagged under the system, patients can be denied care, prevented from seeing doctors or psychiatrists, and sent home. And I also saw this other thing, which is by a couple of the Tories, the very conservative government there, where they're starting to say and starting to change the narrative to Britain must live with coronavirus, even if it means hundreds of deaths and full hospitals. This is what the Tories, a couple of the Tory members, Michael Gove and Jacob Rees-Mogg, signal a major shift in the Tories' approach to coronavirus. Now, you can see what's going on here. It's just neoliberalism on steroids. It's particularly awful when you think about how they're quite willing, as you would expect in a way, and this probably goes for the current Labour government in the UK too, and even my government if it weren't for for pushback, that they're quite happy for people to die of COVID, and that in view of saving the economy, what they think is saving the economy. But of course, these are sovereign economies that there is no deficit. There shouldn't be any deficit fear-mongering with it, but there's often that put out by both major parties, whether it's here in Australia or in the United States or in the UK. And I invite you to read The Deficit Myth by Dr. Stephanie Kelton. That's a very important thing to understand. I'm not suggesting that we save capitalism, but if we're going to have it in place at the moment, people at least need to understand that all this deficit fear-mongering that goes on is really just it's just a lie. It really is a matter of resources, and that those are the constraints. But anyway, if you learn MMT, and there's plenty of on that hashtag online, most of it is by Stephanie Kelton and a number of others, Warren Mosler, the real progressives like Steve Grumbine, people like that. And there's plenty of information. And the deficit myth is something that you can actually, it's not too hard to understand. It's actually written in a very easy, understandable form. But back to this, to the UK and these Tories saying basically that people are expendable and they're more interested in the economy. This is the problem with neoliberalism, and this is why capitalism, this is why capitalism needs to end, because it is anti-people, it is ecocidal, and you cannot put a happy face on it. It's only going to keep getting worse and worse until we're all ruled under fascism, because fascism is capitalism in decay. There will never be any ending of these endless wars, because capitalism and imperialism is inextricably linked. I know I say this often, but I mean it's something that we all need to keep reminding ourselves that, this is not, you cannot put a happy face on capitalism. You will never end the wars while there's the CIA, which is the invisible army of capitalism. It's always going to be looking for another country to invade, another country to steal all their resources, to make them completely make them submit to the U.S. empire, and they destroy any sort of any kind of semblance of democracy that country might have, and they install dictators, and that's what you have from then on until something happens to that by luck they manage to get themselves out of it. But mostly they just go around. The CIA helps go around destroying countries, and the U.S. plunders and pillages that country, and then enjoys the fact that then they have some sort of fascist dictator in there that does the US's bidding. This is what capitalism brings. You cannot sort of actually separate capitalism and imperialism. It's not like we can pretend that capitalism has nothing to do with imperialism, and we can't pretend that capitalism is actually leading us to fascism. You can see it in the US most clearly. So, it's really time now, and it's a moral imperative that we end capitalism, and that there's numerous ways we can do that. One is understanding, most importantly, the public understanding, is to getting this information out about, different people who explain this issue very well, explain socialism, explain what is wrong with capitalism, explain why imperialism and capitalism are inextricably linked, and all of that to get the public to understand. Public don't even realize that there are alternatives to capitalism. This is just a system in place that has not been here forever and a day. It's just one system that has failed miserably and was always intended to be exploitative. But we don't have to continue on with it. And that is why there are so many young people now who feel on a visceral level that this is just wrong. They feel on a visceral level that, sorry, it's very cold here, so I'm a bit bundled up here. On a visceral level, they feel that it is wrong, and they're moving away from it, and they're taking an interest in socialism. And young people are the future. So it's important that we get those resources out to people. I need to understand it. I'm a latecomer to that. Really, I knew that capitalism was wrong, but I certainly don't know much about socialism. So I'm not even going to pretend that I know, or I would not want to do that. But I'm not going to try and explain anything about it. That's why I've mentioned right in the beginning of this that the Party for Socialism and Liberation have this podcast. A lot of people know that this is what is needed, that we need to end capitalism, that we need to move away from it. And that starts with education. That starts with people realizing there is an alternative to it. And like on Twitter, there, and of course socialism, there's some problems with that too, and I mentioned that in my podcast yesterday, that need to be addressed, and that's one is our complete ignoring animal use, as if that's going to just continue on. If we become socialists, we're still going to be exploiting and torturing and killing 1 to 3 trillion land and aquatic animals every year, which means that we're going to be, as well as it being a tremendous violence and completely unnecessary, then we're also destroying the planet as well. So on Twitter today, so that's why we need to go vegan. That's the simple answer to that. Something we don't need permission from any corporations or permission from anybody to do. We just need to do it. It's very simple. It's one of the best decisions you'll make in your life. So let's really think about that now and stop humming and hawing and twiddling our fingers and wringing our hands about climate change and talking about how we want a non-violent world, yet we're participating in the most awful, tremendous violence that one could imagine. So anyway, on Twitter today, I saw this person who was saying, how are we going to, good luck trying to get people to be interested in socialism. I mean, people under 40 maybe, but people over 40. Well, I'm over 40. I don't think that, we need to be ageist about this as if, the boomers, I hate the way people keep stomping on boomers as if all of us are useless and fixed in our ways and can't be open to, that's sort of ageist. And it's also wrong. I know plenty of people who are over 40, who are over 60 even, who are totally open to, that's how you keep yourself young in a way, is you're always open to thinking about new ideas, thinking about different ways of being, if it seems like it's going to improve the lives of others. If we're not interested in improving the lives of others, how on earth are we, what kind of planet do we want? if we don't have any sort of vision of what we want, then we're just going to be lurching around with a blindfold on and tripping over or continuing on down a path that's going to lead over a cliff. We have to have some sort of vision. And that is one of the problems. We have so many distractions, so much bread, circuses kind of stuff, that we aren't even thinking about what we want anymore. So much distraction. And I mean, if we've been also exposed to, say, the Murdoch press for a long time, which a lot of people in the West have, as Malcolm X said, eventually they'll have you hating people that you're supposed to be protecting, basically. And that's how it's been going. That's how it's been going in the U.S. Look at the unhoused situation in the U.S. and the looming unhoused situation that's coming up when, the eviction ban ends. And how the oligarchy or the 1%, the billionaires are swooping up, like BlackRock, swooping up all these houses where people have defaulted on mortgages or whatever, and buying up huge amounts of houses in neighborhoods. They're cleaning up in a pandemic. And that's what they did last time there was a crash. How is this any sort of people-oriented sort of way of living on the earth? It's certainly not non-human. It's certainly against non-humans, where they're just extraneous, and people, human beings. So humans and non-humans are becoming extraneous, and the only interests that are being protected are corporations and the kleptocracy. Well, that is fucked, isn't it? It's well and truly unacceptable, well and truly, do we want to continue on with that sort of anti-human, anti-non-human kind of trajectory? And it's ecocidal. That's why ending capitalism is a moral imperative. That is something we need to put out now very, very strongly. People need to start saying that. Stop worrying about what people think. Stop worrying about people calling you tankies and commies and all that crap, because that's been the religion of the US, is to demonize anybody who's trying to interfere with capitalism and end capitalism. I mean, they've gone to great lengths in the US to do that, literally invading countries and destroying countries, and they're still doing it to end something that might interfere. Any country that wants to do something toward their own people is a country that the US must destroy in some way. Look what they're trying to do with President AMLO in Mexico. He's anti-neoliberalism, and that is unacceptable. And look at Latin American countries. I mean, you I'm sure you're aware of that, what the US tries to do. And China, although China is it sort of does things to the people, it pulls millions of people, hundreds of millions literally, out of poverty, but it's seen as a threat to the US because it's becoming a bigger economic power than the US. So, imperialism is never going to end while the US in particular is basically trying to be the number one exploiter of the rest of the world. So wars are never going to end while we have this crap going on, while we have an insatiable monster going around wanting to be top and the king of the world. And we're never going to have any sort of peace or any kind of real something that that feeds our humanity if we are caught up in this neoliberal scourge. That is, neoliberalism is an expression of fascism. We're never going to have any kind of peace. We're never going to feel like we're important in the sense of that we're human beings that deserve respect and love and care and deserve to have our needs met, meaning the basic things of healthcare, basic resources, and including water, free healthcare, free education. Things that actually, Australia actually had 40 years ago. We had in the early 80s, we had completely free healthcare. There was no health insurance industries like there are now. We had free education, including free university. We were reluctant because of Gough Whitlam. He didn't like the U.S. imperialist foreign policies, and that's one of the reasons the CIA interfered and helped oust him. And it's been a neoliberal mess ever since. I mention this regularly because I have an axe to grind about that. I literally saw Australia change in about 1980. I saw it going that way. I saw it going towards neoliberalism back then. So anyway, these are the reasons, do we really want to live in a kind of world where, particularly if we're all, you could liken it to when this person said to me on Twitter, and he said, or she said, what about the people over 40 and stuff? Good luck trying to convince them. I think on a visceral level, unless they're doing fine, thank you very much, and they've got their healthcare and all of that, and I've got mine, I don't care about you. Unless they're that kind of person, I think other people know there's something terribly wrong, and all they need is to think about that there are alternatives to this awful system. They just need to know there's alternatives to that. People think it's like they're in this sort of box and they can't see outside the box because they just get fed propaganda all the time, and they think that this is all there is. Well, it isn't all there is. And that's why the US is so desperate to destroy these countries that are not like that. Because they don't want any evidence of any country that is faring better, that is trying to look after their own citizens and trying to, what governments were supposed to be, really, in a way. They were supposed to be public servants, the people in governments. But now they're just rulers. Now they're just malicious, sinister, and sadistic rulers of us, almost like feudalism. It's sort of becoming like that. And they'll get more and more desperate to keep control of this the more they see people turning around and thinking, no, I reject capitalism. I reject it. They'll get more and more desperate, and that's why fascism is the natural end product of people rejecting this system, because they will clamp down on people because they do not want to let that go, because they're lining their pockets, and they love the fact that they are doing fine, thank you very much. They're making, as Jeff Bezos makes, $40,000 a minute, or probably much more now. They want that. They want this disparity. Well, F that is what I say. They've had their time, they've had their fun, and it's time for that to end. And I'm not talking about violent overthrow, but I think it may, as I said in the video yesterday, I think it may end up like that, because they're not going to give an inch, and I think people will get so desperate that eventually there will be some sort of violent overthrow of the government. And I'm not talking about the sham that was that Capitol insurrection thing, where a lot of them didn't know what the hell they were doing. And also, if they'd gotten their way, it would have ended up escalating into some sort of fascist system very quickly, because they're not interested in everybody having prosperity, everybody having enough. When I say prosperity, I mean enough and being happy and feeling like they're respected and cared for. They're not interested in that. They're interested in their little group. And what does that remind you of? It reminds me of what's already in place. So anyway, when I hear people sounding so like this learned helplessness, I think that's kind of a little sad. I understand why it's like that, particularly if you live in the US, and in countries where, the neoliberalism is completely out of control, and they're usually countries that the US is meddled in. I can understand that, but at the same time, do we want to keep, sort of basically, we're being hobbled by a ruthless ruling class, and do we want to keep hobbling around, or do we want to try and do something about it? Do we really want to try and change things? And education is key, and then with that, there will be something that will form, there'll be more groups that will form, more organizations, and it will, education is something that they're so frightened of. That's why the Silicon Valley is trying to, put more and more censorship through algorithms and everything else. They're trying to cut back on the ability for people to get alternative information from the usual corporate media propaganda, basically. I mean, if they weren't afraid of education, if they weren't afraid of new information, well, they just let the internet, go on the way it was, 20 years ago, before they started bringing in all these algorithm censorship things and, blocking and banning people and shadow banning and all of that. They're obviously afraid of people finding out alternate ways of being. So that just shows how powerful information is, that they are so desperate that it's just getting more and more draconian, it's getting more and more ridiculous, the ways in which they're trying to keep information from the public and keep us from interacting and forming groups, forming unions and all that kind of thing. So anyway, when I look at the thing from the UK where the government's basically saying, we don't care about people. We don't care if hundreds of people die a day. The economy is more important. Or when you see things like the mental health, basically wanting to save their resources rather than addressing the mental health concerns of the public, and caring about people that are domestic violence survivors, or caring about people who have mental health emergencies and may have that on a regular basis. They would rather save money and turn people away. Literally turn people away that are suicidal. So it's basically saying, I don't care if you live or die. You are too much trouble. You are a drain on our resources, drain on our economy. So go away and die. That's what that's saying to those people in England, in the UK, who are having a mental health crisis. And if we think that that's going to stop there in the UK, it's not, and it's already happening in the United States. Look at how the governments treat people who are unhoused. Look at the homeless veterans in rows in Los Angeles. I mean, it's a spiritual death when you see a society that doesn't care about people who have had hard times, and had hard times because neoliberalism has basically structured it that way. We must always, never ever normalize homelessness, unhoused people. Never ever. We should never ever normalize war. And these are things that are becoming normalized, or have become normalized. Wars have become normalized. And it's verboten to talk about them. It's verboten to question why we're in various countries and destroying them. And it's becoming normalized that people just accept that there's homeless people. That's outrageous, because that's accepting the unacceptable. That is accepting something that is immoral. And in the process, we are cutting our own throat, because if we think that this is going to stop there, eventually it's going to come round to us. That's for certain.